Having $0 in savings isn't just about the number in your bank account. It's about waking up at 3 a.m. with your heart racing because you just remembered you need new tires and you have absolutely no idea how you're going to pay for them. It's about checking your account balance before buying groceries to make sure you have enough for milk. It's about that sinking feeling in your stomach every single time your phone rings because it might be someone asking for money you don't have. Let me tell you what actually happens when you're living with zero savings. And I'm not talking about the obvious stuff like you can't handle emergencies. I'm talking about the psychological warfare, the invisible costs, and the ways it fundamentally changes how you move through the world. My name is Nick, and I've talked to enough people living with zero savings to know that the financial stress is actually the least of it. The real damage is what it does to your brain, your relationships, your health, and your future. If you've ever felt trapped by your financial situation, or you're trying to understand what it's really like to have no buffer, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up, because what I'm about to explain is something most people don't talk about honestly. Here's the first thing that happens when you have zero savings. Your brain goes into permanent survival mode. And I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean it literally. There's actual research on this. When you're living with constant financial scarcity, your brain's prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for complex decision-making and long-term planning, essentially goes offline. Your amygdala, the fear center, takes over. You stop making strategic decisions and start making survival decisions. What does this look like in practice? You know you should meal prep to save money on food, but you're so exhausted from the mental load of managing scarcity that you grab fast food because it's one less decision to make. You know you should shop around for car insurance, but the thought of spending an hour comparing quotes when you're already mentally drained feels impossible. You know you should look for a better paying job, but you don't have the mental energy to update your resume and go through interviews. Every decision becomes about getting through today, not optimizing for tomorrow. I talked to someone who described having zero savings as trying to solve a math problem while someone is screaming in your ear. The constant background stress makes everything harder. You're not dumber or lazier than people with savings. You're just operating with a brain that's running in emergency mode 24/7. That takes a cognitive toll that people with financial cushions literally cannot comprehend. The second thing that happens is what I call the broke tax. When you have zero savings, everything costs more. Your car registration is due, and you don't have the $200 to pay it on time, so you pay it late with a $50 penalty. That's a 25% tax on being broke. Your account dips below zero because a charge hit before your paycheck, so you get hit with a $35 overdraft fee. You just paid $35 for the privilege of not having enough money. Your electric bill is due, but you can't pay it until next week, so you get a late fee. Another broke tax. But it gets worse. You can't afford the $600 to fix your car properly, so you pay $150 for a temporary patch that'll last 6 months. Then, you pay another $150 6 months later. Then the problem gets worse because you've been patching it, and now it's a $200 repair instead of the original $600. You literally paid double because you couldn't afford to fix it right the first time. This is how being broke is expensive in ways that people with savings never experience. The insurance situation is particularly brutal. When you have zero savings, you can't afford to pay your car insurance annually, or even every 6 months, so you pay monthly. That monthly payment includes a fee for paying monthly. You're literally paying extra for not having enough money to pay in advance. Same with rent. Can't afford the security deposit, so you end up in a place that charges higher rent because they know you have no options. The broke tax compounds on itself until you're spending hundreds or thousands more per year than someone with identical expenses who just has savings to draw from. Let me talk about the decision-making nightmare that comes with zero savings. Every single choice becomes a calculation with impossible trade-offs. Your kid needs new shoes because they've outgrown theirs. But if you buy the shoes, you might not have enough for gas to get to work next week. So do you buy the cheap shoes that'll fall apart in 2 months? Or do you risk running out of gas? There's no good answer. Every choice is just picking which problem you'll deal with. Or here's one I heard that broke my heart. A woman had a toothache that was getting worse. She knew she should go to the dentist, but she also knew that would cost at least $200 she didn't have. So she waited and waited, and the problem got worse. By the time the pain was unbearable and she had no choice but to go, what could have been a $200 filling turned into a $1,500 root, canal, and crown. She ended up putting it on a credit card at 24% interest, so that $1,500 dental work eventually cost her over $2,000 after interest. All because she couldn't afford to handle the problem when it was small. This is the poverty trap in its purest form. You can't afford to solve problems when they're small and cheap, so you end up paying way more when they become big and urgent. And that keeps you broke, which means you still can't afford to solve problems when they're small. And the cycle continues forever. It's not a failure of willpower or intelligence. It's a systematic trap that's incredibly difficult to escape. The health consequences of having zero savings are real and terrifying. The stress of financial scarcity literally shortens your lifespan. Your cortisol levels are constantly elevated, which leads to high blood pressure, weakened immune system, increased risk of heart disease, and accelerated aging. You skip doctor's appointments because you can't afford the copay. You don't fill prescriptions because you need that money for rent. You ignore warning signs because dealing with a health problem costs money you don't have. I know someone who ignored chest pains for 3 days because he didn't want to go to the ER and get hit with a massive bill. Turned out he was having a heart attack. He survived, but barely, and now he's dealing with both the health consequences and a $40,000 medical bill that he's going to be paying off for the rest of his life. That's the risk calculation you make when you have zero savings. Is this chest pain worth potentially going into crippling debt over? That's not a decision anyone should have to make, but it's the reality for millions of people. The sleep disruption is another huge piece that nobody talks about. When you have zero savings, you don't sleep well. You're lying in bed at 2 a.m. running calculations in your head. If I skip this payment and pay that one, I can juggle things until next month. If nothing goes wrong, if my car doesn't break down, if nobody gets sick, if I don't get any unexpected expenses. Your brain won't shut off because your nervous system is in constant threat detection mode. And poor sleep makes everything worse. You're more irritable, so your relationships suffer. You make worse decisions, so your work performance drops. You're more likely to get sick, which costs money you don't have and might cause you to miss work. The lack of quality sleep from financial stress creates a cascade of negative effects that compound the original problem. Let's talk about what zero savings does to your relationships, because this might be the most painful part. Money stress is one of the leading causes of divorce, but it's not really about the money itself. It's about the constant tension, the arguments about every purchase, the resentment that builds when one person feels like they're carrying all the burden. When you have zero savings, every financial discussion becomes a fight because there are no good options, only bad ones and worse ones. I watched a couple nearly destroy their marriage over having zero savings. Neither of them was being irresponsible. They were just living paycheck to paycheck on modest incomes, but the stress made them turn on each other. He'd resent her for buying coffee, even though it was $3. She'd resent him for the beer in the fridge. They weren't actually mad about coffee or beer. They were terrified about their financial situation and taking it out on each other because they didn't know what else to do. The shame and isolation are devastating too. When you have zero savings, you start declining invitations because you can't afford to participate. Can't go to dinner with friends because you don't have $40 for your meal. Can't go on the group trip because you don't have money for the hotel. Can't go to the concert or the game, or even just out for drinks. Eventually, people stop inviting you. Not because they're bad people, but because you always say no, and they assume you're not interested. So now, you're not just broke, you're lonely and isolated. And that isolation makes everything harder. You don't have the social connections that might lead to job opportunities. You don't have the support network to help you through tough times. You're dealing with this crushing financial stress completely alone, which makes the mental health impact even worse. The career limitations of having zero savings are massive, but invisible. When you have zero savings, you can't afford to take risks. You can't quit a toxic job to look for something better because you need the paycheck. You can't take a temporary pay cut for a position that would set you up for higher earnings later. You can't relocate for a better opportunity because you don't have money for moving expenses. You're trapped in whatever job you currently have, regardless of whether it's good for your long-term career. I know someone who was offered a job that would have been an amazing career move, but it required relocating to another city. The company would reimburse his moving expenses, but he had to pay them up front and get reimbursed later. He didn't have the $3,000 for the moving truck, deposits on a new apartment, and living expenses for the gap between jobs. So he had to turn down a job that would have increased his salary by $20,000 a year. That's the opportunity cost of zero savings. He missed out on potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars over his career because he couldn't access $3,000 at the right moment. The education and skill building limitations are similar. That certification that would qualify you for better paying jobs costs $800, but you don't have $800, so you stay stuck in lower paying work. That online course that could teach you a valuable skill costs $300, but you can't afford it. The networking event with a $50 ticket that might lead to job opportunities can't go. You're locked out of the very investments in yourself that could improve your earning potential. Here's something that people with savings don't realize. When you have zero savings, you pay attention to money in ways they never have to. You know exactly how much money is in your account at all times, probably down to the dollar. You know when every paycheck hits. You know the exact dates every bill is due and exactly how much each one is. You've memorized which gas station is 3 cents cheaper per gallon. You know which grocery store has the best prices on which items. This constant mental accounting is exhausting. Your brain is running financial calculations continuously. Can I afford this? If I buy this, can I still pay for that? This cost $8.47. I have 11.23s in my account. If I buy this, I'll have $2.76 left. Is that enough to get me through until Friday? This level of constant vigilance and calculation takes mental energy that people with savings get to use for other things, like career advancement, creative pursuits, or just relaxing. The way zero savings affects your sense of self is profound. You start to internalize the idea that you're bad with money, that you're a failure, that you're less than other people. Society tells you that if you're not saving money, it's because you're irresponsible or lazy or making poor choices. Sometimes that's true, but often it's just that you're trying to survive on insufficient income while dealing with systemic barriers that make it nearly impossible to get ahead. The guilt and shame around having zero savings is crushing. You feel like you should be doing better. You see people on social media talking about their investments and their savings goals, and you're over here trying to figure out how to make it to your next paycheck. You feel embarrassed to talk about your situation, so you pretend everything is fine, which means you don't ask for help when you might actually need it. Let me talk about the emergency spiral, because this is where zero savings becomes actively dangerous. When you have zero savings and something goes wrong, you have only bad options. You can put it on a credit card at 22% interest. You can take out a payday loan at 400% APR. You can borrow from family and damage those relationships. You can just not deal with the problem and hope it doesn't get worse. None of these are good options, and all of them make your financial situation worse. So your car breaks down. You need it to get to work, so you have to fix it. You don't have the money, so you put the $800 repair on a credit card. Now, you have $800 in credit card debt at 22% interest. The minimum payment is $25 a month, but that's $25 you didn't have before, so something else doesn't get paid. Maybe you're late on your electric bill, so you get a late fee. Now, you're paying interest on the credit card debt and late fees on your bills, and you're actually worse off than before the emergency happened. And because you're worse off, the next emergency is even harder to handle. Maybe you can't afford to fix your car the next time it breaks, so you miss work, so you lose income, so you fall further behind. Each emergency pushes you deeper into the hole, and without savings to break the cycle, you just keep spiraling down. The psychological difference between temporary zero and chronic zero is important to understand. Lots of people hit zero savings at some point, maybe right out of college, or after a job loss, or during a major life transition. That's temporary zero, and it's stressful, but not necessarily devastating. You're broke right now, but you have a plan to get out of it, and you believe you will. Chronic zero is different. That's when you've been at zero for years. You've tried to save and failed so many times that you don't believe it's possible anymore. You've given up on ever getting ahead. That hopelessness is toxic because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't believe you can save money, you won't make the choices necessary to save money, which means you'll stay at zero, which reinforces your belief that you can't save. Breaking out of chronic zero requires somehow finding hope when you have every reason to feel hopeless. The way zero savings affects your relationship with time is fascinating and horrible. When you have savings, you can think about the future. You can make plans, set goals, imagine what your life might look like in 5 or 10 years. When you have zero savings, the future doesn't exist. There's only right now and maybe next week. You literally cannot afford to think about the future because you're using all your mental energy just surviving the present. This creates a weird temporal trap where the very thing you need to escape your situation, long-term thinking and planning, is the thing your situation makes impossible. You can't save for the future because you're too busy trying to survive today. But surviving today without ever investing in tomorrow guarantees you'll still be in the same situation a year from now, 5 years from now, maybe forever. Here's what having zero savings does to your risk tolerance. It makes you simultaneously too risk-averse and too desperate. You're too risk-averse to make smart investments or career moves that might improve your situation because you can't afford any downside risk. But you're also desperate enough to make terrible decisions like payday loans or risky get-rich-quick schemes because you're looking for any possible escape. I've seen people with zero savings fall for every financial scam imaginable. Multi-level marketing schemes that promise quick money, payday loans with predatory interest rates, rent-to-own furniture that costs 3 times retail, cryptocurrency investments they don't understand based on promises of quick returns. The desperation of having zero savings makes you vulnerable to exploitation in ways that people with financial security are protected from. Let me talk about what it takes to go from zero savings to having savings, because this is the hardest transition in personal finance. It's not about the math or the strategy. It's about the psychological breakthrough. You have to somehow believe that saving is possible, even though you've never successfully done it. You have to find the willpower to sacrifice in the present for a future benefit you've never experienced. You have to maintain discipline through setbacks and emergencies that will definitely happen. The people who successfully escape zero savings usually have one of a few things happen. Either they get a significant income increase that gives them breathing room, or they experience some crisis that scares them enough to change their behavior, or they find some support system, whether it's a partner, a friend, or a community, that helps them stay accountable. Very few people do it purely through individual willpower, because the systemic pressures keeping you at zero are too strong. Here's something that might be controversial. Sometimes staying at zero is the rational choice given your constraints. If you're making $28,000 a year in a high cost of living area, living with roommates, and already cutting every possible expense, there might not be anything left to save. The personal finance gurus will tell you that you just need to work harder or be more disciplined, but that's not always true. Sometimes the problem isn't your behavior. It's that the economic system isn't set up to allow people at certain income levels to get ahead. That doesn't mean you're doomed forever, but it does mean that escaping zero savings might require systemic changes, not just personal ones. That might mean moving to a lower cost of living area, changing careers, going back to school, finding a higher paying job. These are all easier said than done, and they all require resources and risk that you don't have when you're at zero. It's a catch-22 that's genuinely difficult to solve. The most important thing to understand about having zero savings is that it's not a moral failing. Society wants you to believe that if you don't have savings, it's because you're irresponsible or lazy or making bad choices. Sometimes that's true. But often, people at zero savings are working incredibly hard, making the best choices available to them, and still can't get ahead because wages haven't kept up with costs, because housing is unaffordable, because healthcare is expensive, because childcare costs as much as rent, because the system is rigged against people starting from zero. If you're at zero savings right now, the path forward isn't easy, but it exists. It starts with finding any way to create even a tiny buffer. Even $100 in savings changes your psychology. It proves to yourself that you can do it. From there, you build to $500, then $1,000, then more. It's slow and it's hard, and there will be setbacks, but it's possible. And getting to even $1,000 in savings will fundamentally change your life in ways that people who've never been at zero can't fully understand. Having zero savings isn't just about the number. It's about the constant stress, the impossible choices, the health consequences, the relationship damage, the career limitations, and the way it traps you in survival mode. But understanding what zero savings actually does to your life is the first step toward changing it. Because once you truly understand the cost of staying at zero, you can start to see why doing whatever it takes to build even a small buffer is worth the sacrifice. Your life with savings won't be perfect, but it'll be fundamentally different from life at zero. And that difference might just save you.